Hi there, today is Monday, October 19th, and our reading lesson today has the objective, I can describe the important characters and events from the first part of the story. So today we'll be beginning a new book today called A Map into the World by an author who, it's kind of interesting, her name is Khao Kalia Yang. She's a Hmong woman who grew up here in St. Paul, so she went to St. Paul schools and grew up and became an author. So now she earns money by writing books for both adults and for kids. This is her first book for kids. And it's actually, it's fiction, but she's based it on her own experiences moving into a new home. Let's begin by taking a look at these questions, which you've seen before from a previous lesson. They're really important because by asking and thinking about these questions as we're reading, we can really keep track of the important parts of the story, who the characters are, and what is happening. So we'll be talking about who the characters are, where is the story taking place, that's setting, when is the story taking place, also setting, and what has happened in the story, the events. And remember, we won't have to name every single thing that's happened. We'll just concentrate on the most important things. All right, so here, this is the cover page. You see a for sale sign and some people walking by a home. And then over here on this side, this might look familiar to many of you. Some of you may have one in your home. Others, you may have seen this at school. It's, in English, we might call it a Hmong story cloth. And in Hmong, I'm not going to say it just right because I don't speak Hmong, but it's called a pandao. And so these tell a story from the Hmong people's culture. All right, let's begin. The first time we saw the swing and the slide and the garden of the green house with the big windows, my mother sat down in a chair in the backyard and said she did not want to get up. Tsai Tsai and I looked at the garden and she pointed out tomatoes, green beans, and a watermelon, round as my mother's belly. Oh, I'm thinking her mother's got a round belly, and the way she's sitting makes me think she's probably got a baby growing inside her. So this little girl will have a sister, or a brother, excuse me, will have a baby. Tsai Tsai knelt down to examine the dirt. I asked my mother if I could try the swing, and she said, yes, Pandao. Now here on this page, I was wondering as I was reading if you knew who is the narrator. Another way of asking that is who is telling or narrating the story. So see if when we read the words on this page, if you can name the narrator. The narrator is the person telling the story. The greenhouse became our home. I helped Tsai Tsai hang the special story cloth about how the Hmong got to America on the empty wall by the big window of the living room. Well, if I ask who the narrator is, who's telling the story, it must be either this person or this person, right? Because it says, I helped Tsai Tsai. So I don't know on this page if this is Tsai Tsai or if this is Tsai Tsai and who I is. But when I look back to the previous page, I remember down here, she said that she looked at the garden and that there was a watermelon in the garden that was as round as my mother's belly. So these words, my mother's belly, tell me, well, whose mother is this? It can't be the older woman. It must be her mother. So here is the narrator. It's the little girl is the one who is telling the story. We saw an old man and woman through the window. They waved. We waved back. Later, my mother and father brought me across the street. The old man's name was Bob, and the old woman's name was Ruth. Up close, I could see that they were even older than Tsai Tsai. So here are some new neighbors. Now at this point in the story, we're not sure yet if they're really important characters or if they'll just be on this page. But we know their names are Bob and Ruth. Tsai Tsai and I were in the garden picking tomatoes and beans and checking on the watermelon when my parents brought my baby brothers home from the hospital. I ran to the gate. The boys were smaller than my baby dolls, but cuter than their fuzzy heads and red lips and round brown eyes. Some days the babies cried very loud. I covered my ears with my hands and asked my father to take me outside. Bob and Ruth sat on their special bench. We waved back and forth. So there's the neighbors again. The leaves of the 2 ginkgo trees by Bob and Ruth's house turned yellow like apricots. One day a brisk wind blew and the fan-shaped leaves came flying down. They covered the grass and the street and the dark mouth of the drain. Bob raked while Ruth sat and watched. I brought in a leaf for the babies to touch, but my mother said, "There's still too little, Pandau." The snow made the world quiet around us. We stopped seeing Bob and Ruth outside. The snowflakes fell on their driveway and glittered in the gray light. I made a ball of snow for my brothers, but it melted before they woke up from their nap. At night, I looked out our big window at Bob and Ruth's house to see their lights shining across the dark street. Sometimes I saw a shape of a person looking back at me. I waved, but the shadow person never waved back. If you peek in the window here, you can see the shadow person, the shape of that person looking back, who doesn't wave back at Pandau when she's waving her hand. All right, we're going to stop here today. And remember that our focus was, was that we would describe the important characters and events from the first part of the story. And to do that, let's remember what our questions are. First, who are the characters in the story? Well, we know the narrator, the main character telling the story, is a little girl named Pandau. We know she lives with her mother and father, her 2 little brothers who have names, but we don't know what their names are. An older woman named Tsai Tsai, who probably is a grandmother. And Tsai Tsai might probably maybe mean something in Hmong that I don't know. Maybe it means grandma. And then finally, I think Bob and Ruth, the neighbors across the street, seem pretty important because they've been on many different pages in the story. And they were on this last page that we just read, although there's just one person who doesn't wave back. If I ask where the story is taking place and when is the story taking place, it seems like it's mostly taking place in a neighborhood in somewhere in St. Paul, in Pandau's home, inside and outside. And there's quite a few scenes where she's looking across the street at Bob and Ruth's house. When is the story taking place? It's happening in the present, right around 2020. There's nothing that seems like it's happening in the future. The people are wearing just kind of clothing like we wear, and their homes look like ours. So it's not happening in the past either. And finally, what has happened in the story? Well, so far, they moved into their new home, and they've met their new neighbors, Bob and Ruth, and her little 2 baby brothers were born. And then the story ends as winter has begun. The story doesn't end, I'm sorry. We ended our story today. Now we're going to practice for fiction, just like we have done in the past. So this first box says title, and this is where I would type in the title of my story, which is a map into the world. And the author, we do know, her name is Khao Kalia Yang. The characters we just finished naming are a little girl, Pandau, who I'm going to have to check to make sure I'm spelling her name right. Pandau, her parents, baby brothers, Tsai Tsai, I'm going to name her Tsai Tsai because I'm not sure if is that grandma or not, and neighbors, Bob and Ruth. And it's okay if my writing got a little longer that didn't quite fit in the box, no worries. The setting is definitely the present day, okay, it's not happening in the future or the past, in a neighborhood in St. Paul, we'll call her the narrator's house. In the beginning, and we'll just write about the beginning because we haven't gotten too far into the story yet. The narrator's family moved into a new house. Remember that we said we don't have to name every single thing that happened, just the main ideas. She moved into a new house, met Bob and Ruth, her neighbors, and her baby brothers were born. And that's where we will end today. So for your work in your response is going to be working on a story map just like this one, but you will not be writing about this story. Instead, you will be writing about one of your own independent books.